call on Alec Riley. 7 minutes, please, Mr Riley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would begin where I forgot at the stage one, was to thank the Finance Committee, because the Finance Committee did a good piece of work on this bill and taking evidence that I think was really useful, and that should be put on the record. I did say that Labour would support this bill at stage one, and that we would support the passage of this bill as speedily as possible. And I think it is right to draw a line under the poll tax. It's right also to say that the success of the referendum in terms of the numbers of people that actually registered to vote should not then have resulted in some of these statements that were made. And I think the then First Minister was absolutely correct to say that he would legislate, and we're certainly happy to be here to be supporting this bill today. We heard many passionate speeches in this chamber about just how bad, how unfair, and the misery that was caused to communities up and down Scotland and to individuals in communities as a result of the poll tax. It was a bad tax, it was a wrong tax, and it needed to go. But there's a couple of other points that I made in stage one that I think it's important to make again. The Finance Committee took evidence, and the point was made, I think, by East Ayrshire Council, where they said that they had taken evidence from people who had struggled to pay, but paid the council tax, paid the poll tax, even though they objected to it in principle. And I think today it is important, when we draw a line under the poll tax, it's very important that we do equally recognise that many people throughout that difficult period paid the poll tax. For some of those people, they absolutely struggled to pay the poll tax, but they did so. And they did so because they valued local government services. And if you remember back to that time, I was a member of Fife Regional Council at that time, the poll tax threw local government finance into turmoil, and it had the probability of throwing services into uncertainty and turmoil. So to all those people who did pay and struggled to pay, we should equally say today, thank you to them, and we recognise that they made a sacrifice at that time. But it is right to move on from there. It's also important the Deputy First Minister did point out in his speech at that point that in terms of collection, by 2013-14, the amount of monies that was being collected was down to £327,000, and there has been now a deal agreed with COSLA. And my view is, and it's a view that I think we need to take on board, is we were at the stage where councils, it was getting to the point where it could be costing councils more money to collect than they were actually able to collect. So by and large, as the Minister has said, and as we've saw for the evidence, many councils had stopped collecting, and councils were at the point where it was becoming really difficult to collect much more. So for that point of view, I think we are taking the steps today to formalise this, but we were really at that point where very little of this money was actually going to be collected. So it is right to draw a line and pull a line over it. But there's a couple of other points, I think, that come from the debate. I think it was Perth and Kinross Council when they gave evidence to the Finance Committee, and they talked about having to pursue the poll tax and that interfering with some of the collection that they had of council tax, and that some of the same families that were in debt those 20 years ago in terms of poll tax also had agreements in place and were paying back debts now in terms of the council tax. And what that shows us is that some 20 years on, in communities, the same families, the same individuals are still today struggling with deprivation and social inequality that they were some 20 years ago. And that has to surely tell us that there is more that we need to be doing to tackle inequality and to tackle poverty. The Deputy First Minister said that those paying off community charge debts include some of the poorest and most vulnerable who were unable to pay at that time and are still in arrears, having arrears deducted from their social security benefits. And that should wake us up that whatever poverty strategies have been put in place, are still not working for many communities and for many people and many families, and it's a generational thing. We've not been able to break that cycle of deprivation and poverty that should actually shame us all in this chamber, and we need to highlight that today and look at how we actually are going to tackle that. And it links to local government and the fact that we are talking about local government finance, because the Minister talks about council tax, and we know that council tax in its current form, and certainly where we're at right now, is causing major difficulties out there in communities in terms of not being a sustainable way forward for financing local government. And we need to find a way forward, because the type of budgets that we're seeing local authorities announce this week and the type of cuts are biting into local government services right across Scotland. We need to find a way to properly fund local government finance. So some 22 years on, for the poll tax being scrapped, we still don't have in place a proper mechanism of funding local government finance. And that brings me right back to my point about poverty, because I believe that you won't be able to tackle poverty and inequality in Scotland unless you have a national poverty strategy that links into a local poverty strategy, and at the heart of that, and delivering that locally, is the community planning partners, and key to that is local government itself. Local government is the body that can tackle inequality and poverty at the local level and actually change things. And if it's not financed properly, and if local government finance is broken, then that won't work. So today it is with pleasure, I think, that we'll see this bill go through, and we can draw a line under the poll tax, but the message is we have to sort local government finance.